Hello, church. So as promised, I'm going to be offering a bit of a catch up from some of the things we were talking about a couple of weeks ago on Sunday morning to introduce what we call the second unfolding of discipleship. The first being our midweek devotions that we've been practicing for about 2 months now. And then that unfolds into the monthly oikos gathering. As a bit of a recap, our midweek devotions looks a sheet like this. Every week we have a text that we share together. This is more about practice. And then eventually what will happen is, as we disciple one another, we might pick different books or different texts that we want to focus on. Just as a recap on the midweek devotions, this is really kind of encouraging us to private worship, to have maybe a worship song, Jesus prayer. Some of these things we'll be talking about in the future. Asking God to speak directly to you. The goal being to read more for transformation and information, and to meditate in God's words and pray through the answers. The first of the 3 questions, as we're familiar with, is about God and His goodness and the good news itself. So I've found that this has been very fruitful in reminding us the one we worship and the source of everything good, that the gospel itself is the ground of everything we hear from God, to observe what He says to us, but also what He might call us to do. We don't do this because we're trying to be on God's good side. God is already good. Because of the gospel, we are good with Him. Then the second question we're asking each week is, what is God saying? And this can be a very mechanical process for you to kind of just write through the things that you see are the point of the text. So far, we've been focusing on the Psalms, which has made the God focus, like what is it saying about God, easier. But there are clearly ideas that are being taught there. But then the second question under the observe question is, what is God saying to you? So what is it about who God is and what God is saying to you that connects to you personally? This is where we kind of pray through being open to what's going on in our lives. Is there a connection between the text and our lives? And we write those things down. And then finally, we ask, what are you going to do about it? This is definitely a wrestling portion for us, because it's often common as Christians to maybe worship God and maybe learn ideas, what we observe He is saying to us, but making it tangible, being open to what specifically God might be calling us to do, simple or complicated, hard or easy, is a challenge. But we're being encouraged each week to really bring from the gospel to the content to action. So that's been the first unfolding. Now what we're moving to now is the oikos. Oikos is a Greek word found in the Bible, which means home. And this is the idea of taking what our personal experiences of are to a gathering of a number of folks and families, and really being the church together, having a meal together. And of course, we've been practicing this on Sunday mornings, so having a meal. Then secondly, sharing questions, life-sharing questions. One of the things we will probably do is what's called high, low, buffalo as we're eating our meal. What are the highs of our week? What are the lows? What are the buffaloes or the weird things that have happened? Just a good way for people, let's say if they come and they're got no interest, no real connection to Jesus yet, they could come eventually to these gatherings, these meals. They can easily share what are the highs, the lows, and the buffaloes, and be part of what's going on. And then the final movement of the night will be to review the oikos summary sheet. Each of you should have a copy, not just of 4 weeks of devotionals, but also at least one summary sheet. This is what it looks like on the screen. And this has 4 different questions. Either are questions that you will review ahead of time and fill out as much as you can. Some of it will be filled out in the meeting. So again, this listening is the first question. How have you been listening to God, especially in the future, if we maybe pick different books or different themes that we individually want to be reading? you can share that. I've been reading the book of Isaiah, or I've been reading about the theme of peace or comfort. So this is what we write. I've been reading about these things. And then the second question under listening is, what has God been saying? And I think we've probably found week to week, there's differences we feel we observe that God is saying, but maybe there's common themes. What are the things that God has been saying? I mean, you could certainly just list the 4 weeks of what God's been saying to you. The second question, the second move in our time together is, what are you going to do to follow God's direction? So this is where we take the doing part of the midweek devotions and start listing those out. And again, some of these things may be different week to week, and I sense this is how Jesus disciples us, that there are themes, there are movements that Jesus is moving us on in obedience. And then here is the really important part, kind of the heart part of being the church together, is how can we hold you accountable? And this is where, as we share what we feel God's calling us to do, then we can say, well, how can you hold me accountable? Ask me about it next week. Or, ask me about it the next oikos gathering. Ask me about it personally. So these are accountability is a big part of us growing together. We see this in Jesus in Luke chapter 10, where he sends out the disciples. They come back and report what they've been experiencing about God and hearing what God is saying, what they've been doing, and Jesus admonishes and encourages and corrects them. Accountability, missional living. Again, this is a really a growth area for us. And that is, how are you living out the mission of God to get people in the world connected to him? So there's stories of relationships. We'll be digging into this in more detail in the next unfolding, I guess, where we can talk about rhythms of our lives that allow us to connect with people. But again, this is part of the monthly accountability, encouragement to be investing in people that you meet every day. It could be just the simplest thing, first a conversation, maybe a meal, etc. And then the final question is PLAMP, prayer. How can we pray for you, and how can you pray for others? This is where, as we've been hearing about people's growth and challenge, we can share and pray for each other. What a wonderful way to finish this oikos gathering of a meal, life-sharing questions, and the oikos summary sheet. So that's it for the summary. I hope it's helpful. I encourage you to ask any questions if you like, but let's keep unfolding the gospel